morning. Another day, another wearable test. Today we're doing only OnePlus 12, the latest flagship from OnePlus, and we'll explore all while we test out this phone as per the usual. But first things first. Coffee. Check. And this is Hide and Seek. And I've been meaning to come here for a bit, actually. It's a wildly decorated cafe by day and a cocktail bar at night near McCarran Park here in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. The art everywhere is impressive, honestly, as is just the level of things on the walls and the plants everywhere, but instead of it feeling chaotic, it's actually kind of cozy feeling. Skylights help it feel less like a cave, and the couches are actually soft and comfy too. Now, speaking of the design of the place though, let's talk about the design of the OnePlus 12. Firstly, we have this flowy emerald color, which is like a green marble-like design, which people either love or thinks it looks like a stained kitchen counter. I personally like that it's something different and that the matte texture feels nice to hold and means no fingerprints either. The design itself is very familiar though, with the same offset circle that we've come to know from OnePlus lately. Around the front, we have a 6.82-inch AMOLED display that claims it can hit 4,500 nits of brightness. Regardless of the actual numbers, though, it is definitely bright, and it makes it easy to see in daylight. It also has support for HDR10 Plus content, as well as Dolby Vision. Now, that display is also an adaptive 120Hz high refresh display, so animations and scrolling appear smoother, but it can save battery when something isn't moving on the screen by dropping the refresh down to 1 Hz. On the side, we have our usual OnePlus Alert slider, which can be used to change the phone from ring to vibrate to silent. I personally leave it on vibrate in the middle and never touch it again until, pulling it out of my pocket occasionally moves it from that position and I have to put it back. The phone is also IP64 rated, so splashes of water like rain are fine, but don't dunk it underwater. Okay, we're now at Talea, a brewery here in New York City that was started by 2 MBA-holding homebrewers, Leanne and Tara, who left their jobs to try their hand in the beer industry. This is their flagship brewery and tap room here in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. They opened this location in March of 2021, but they already have 4 in total now throughout the city. And the beers are interesting too, because they make a point to try and make easier drinking beers that have lower bitterness and maybe a bit more fruit-forward flavors. Now, don't be turned off by that. Yes, they do have some fruity beers, but most have a really nice hint of sweetness or fruit, and there are plenty of others for all different tastes. And honestly, when they open the outside, it's a great place to drink some lighter beers in the summer. They also happen to serve coffee from 10 a.m., and they invite people to come sit and work here during the day, and then, they hope you transition to a beer maybe after. Now, this colorful spot does seem like a good place to talk about the cameras on the OnePlus 12. We have a new 50-megapixel f1.6 aperture, 1 by 1.43-inch main sensor with 1.12 micron-sized pixels that get binned in sets of 4 to get a 12.5-megapixel image with 2.28 micron-sized pixels by default. That sensor is actually a tad larger than the OnePlus 11, and the faster aperture of 1.6 versus 1.8 should in theory help with low-light performance, but I'll let you be the judge as the sun goes down. Then we have a new 64-megapixel f2.6 1 by 2-inch 3x sensor with 0.7 micron sized pixels that get binned in sets of 4 to get a 16 megapixel image with 1.4 micron sized pixels by default. Now, this compared to the much smaller 2x camera from last year is a big improvement in my opinion. One thing that is interesting though is that because the telephoto is 64 megapixels, we can do the same sensor cropping that we saw on the Oppo Find X6 Pro from last year to take the 3x and make it a 6x zoom by cropping out 16 megapixels from inside the center of that sensor. Now, this means no more binning, so smaller pixels, and that means that low light will probably suffer, but it's still nice to have the extra focal length in my opinion. And then we have a very similar to last year 48 megapixel f2.2 aperture 1 by 2-inch ultra wide sensor with 0.8 micron sized pixels that get binned in sets of 4 to get a 12 megapixel image with 1.6 micron sized pixels when done by default. And I will say across the board, it at least feels like the colors match a bit better across all of these cameras than they did last year. And finally, we have a 32 megapixel f2.4 aperture 1 by 2.74 inch selfie camera with 0.8 micron size pixels that weirdly don't get binned at all by default, and is actually just a 32 megapixel image. Now, this is compared to the 16 megapixel 1 micron size pixels from the OnePlus 11. Now, as always, the hardware tells only a part of the story, and the software makes a big difference, as we've seen with plenty of other phones. And here on the OnePlus 12, if you couldn't tell by the H branding on the back, we actually have Hasselblad helping with the color science. Now, Now, I personally think I prefer the Pixel's images, but the Hasselblad's more neutral look is nice too, and I'm sure some people out there might prefer it. Welcome to Fandimata, which is a derivative of words in Romani, a lesser-known Indo-European language, and it means to connect. It's a two-level Mediterranean-inspired restaurant inside an old warehouse. Plants cover the space, meant to mimic a tropical oasis according to Floresta, the local floral design studio that created the foliage plan for the space, giving it this Greek beach club kind of vibe. Now, they have art shows here, live music on certain days, and apparently a very solid brunch. For dinner, though, dishes range from meze platters with homemade bread to short rib pappardelle pasta to pizzas even. And upstairs is a small 6-seat mezcal bar called Little Oaxaca with over 50 different mezcals. Now before we start drinking agave-based spirits though, let's talk about the software and the battery on the OnePlus 12. For the software, we have Oxygen OS, which used to be a very minimalistic and ultra-optimized operating system. But in recent years, as Oppo has pulled the OnePlus brand back into their fold more, they have since made Oxygen OS and ColorOS basically the same, which is a bit of a shame. And not just in my opinion, ask anyone on the internet really. Now, if you've never used the older version of Oxygen OS, then you won't probably care as much, as this new version and ColorOS are snappy enough and they work well enough. Something I'm actually happy about though, that they didn't mimic from Oppo, is the fact that double tapping the power button quick launches the camera from any screen. Something every other major Android phone does, but Oppo doesn't, and I've been bugging them for a long time to do so. It's just good for when you need a quick shot of something. Now, something on the OnePlus 12 that is actually very welcomed from Oppo is a dual battery design, which is partly what helps with a super fast 100-watt charging that they're using their Super VOOC chargers for, as it can fill both halves of the battery at the same time. That 100 watts is actually 80 watts here in the US, but it still manages to get the phone from 0 to 100 in 30 minutes versus the 26 minutes outside of the US when they get the full 100 watts. And they have 50-watt wireless charging using their specific AirVOOC air-cooled chargers for that, and that should get it fully charged in about 55 minutes. The OnePlus 11 didn't actually have wireless charging at all last year for some reason, so even if not using the AirVOOC charger, any Qi charger can still work compared to last year. Now that dual battery design is not new, they've been doing it for a while, but they're pushing it a bit this year. Now, those dual batteries are 2700 milliamps each, giving us a whopping 5400 milliamps in total, and it shows. That plus the software optimizations gives this phone some pretty solid battery life, frankly. So, here is my screen on time and my usage for today, but as always, keep in mind this is not a normal day. I use my camera way more than you ever would. So, here's another day that was not a real-world test day, so you at least have something to compare it to. Now, overall, it's a solid phone for the money, for sure. I think, as I mentioned, I prefer the Pixel 8 Pro myself, which you can find on sale now for the same price or less these days, and that's mainly because of the software and the photos. But this phone will run circles around it battery life-wise. And if you are a person who just doesn't want anything to do with Samsung, Google, or Apple, OnePlus is the underdog that you might like. And there you go. I'll leave links to the best price I can find on the OnePlus 12 as well as the Pixel 8 and Pixel 8 Pro. Subscribe and ding the bell if you're not already so you get notified when I do new videos and we explore new places with new tech. And I'm gonna go try some mezcal. Good night. Scooter. Car. Scooter. Car. Bus. Always a good start to the day.